All right. Hi, everybody. Jeff Nippard here. Today, we're going to be talking about 7 mistakes that natural lifters make.
All right. Number one. Okay. What's number one? Jeff is a natural pro.
Right.
So he knows what he's talking about. Number one.
So the number one thing I find most natural lifters think is that you can't actually achieve much naturally. They set their expectations too low for what is actually achievable naturally. Have you noticed that?
In regards to kind of like everything, right? I can't eat a lot of calories. I can't train real hard. I can't really grow. Yeah.
So what I find is this takes a couple forms. So one form is people will think, oh, if I'm natural, I can't achieve a high muscularity or I can't achieve a high level of leanness. And then that leads a lot of people to assume that if someone has achieved a high level of muscularity or a high level of leanness, then they can't be natural. So it's a very defeatist mentality. It's like you're doomed from the outset, because I think there is some truth to the idea that whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Now, obviously, there is a limitation to what you can achieve naturally. There's a limitation to what you can achieve with steroids. But if you set that bar really low from the outset, that can only hurt you. So it's not a good mentality to have, in my opinion.
No, and I will tell you this, like when I was training, I started training at 12 years old, and I obviously trained natural through junior high and high school. And at 19, 20 years old, I had a 500-pound squat natural. I mean, I was training my butt off natural. And when I was 20, I actually started winning shows. And I actually did not have that mentality. I was actually on the other side and thought I could be natural Mr. Olympia, which is obviously I haven't had my clouds. But to your point, my expectations were, man, I'm gonna be awesome natural.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And I think that that's healthier, because I find with the internet, there's hyper skepticism. It's like everyone thinks that everyone who looks better than them is on steroids. And it's okay to be skeptical. It's totally fine. But I think it's better to see the positive in physiques that you look up to rather than negative. And if you want to think people are using or not, that's okay. It's okay to like wonder about that. But when you attach a very low threshold to what is in fact achievable, you're probably not going to surpass that threshold, right? You're setting yourself up for failure. So skepticism is fine. I encourage that. But I think that you should look to physiques and draw inspiration from them rather than judge them overly critically and then attach what you might be able to accomplish to what other people have,
All right.
That's number one. Avoid that.
Number two, the first thing that came into my mind was training intensity. And probably because on my channel, I get so many people saying, well, can I do that, John? Is that too hard for me? And my thought process is, it's more challenging for a natural athlete to gain as much muscle as someone who's enhanced. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense for me to go along this line of thinking that, well, I can't train as hard, because you actually do have to train as hard. So I think there's this irrational fear of, I can't train hard, I can't take a set to failure, I can never do a 4-strep. Like I just think there's this irrational fear about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone, natural or enhanced, has to train hard. Like when I set up my fundamentals of training, I set it up on a ladder. The first rung of the ladder is safety, because if you get injured, you're screwed. It doesn't matter. That's the most important thing. And part of that is it's basically longevity. So it has to be safe and enjoyable. That's the most important thing. You have to stick to it. After that, it's effort. How hard are you training? Because it doesn't matter how much you optimize all the variables of volume, intensity, frequency, exercise selection, every little cue, rest periods. You could have all that stuff perfect. If the effort isn't there, you're not going to move forward.
Great point. That is a fantastic point.
And it doesn't matter if you're natural or not. Now, I found lately there's been this like trend and then an anti-trend and then a response to the anti-trend where it's like, okay, yes, you have to train hard, but I believe that just like the other variables, whether natural or not, it makes most sense to manage it in a way that makes sense. So that's not always every set to failure and beyond. You don't train that way. I don't train that way. But it also doesn't mean that you're just in the gym going through the motions, executing the perfect rep and then leaving 3-4 reps in reserve on every single set.
Which is really 15 reps.
Which is really, exactly right. And then that's the whole issue with that. But the bottom line is you have to apply yourself and you have to exert yourself appropriately if you want to maximize your results. There's no question about it.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. So number 3, this is one that I've noticed a lot lately. There's this pervasive myth in the natural community that if you built your physique naturally, you'll maintain it forever. Whereas and I think it comes as a response to, you see enhanced guys when they come off cycle, they lose all their size, right? Whereas natural guys, their physiques tend to be a little more stable over time. But I think that this belief can be damaging because it leads to lazy training. So I've noticed this myself. If I believe that, oh, I built this physique naturally, I can just do whatever now and I'll maintain it. No, I'll start to lose muscle if I start training more lazily. And then when I pick the intensity back up again, or I get more intelligent with my approach, I'll build my physique back again. And just like someone who's enhanced, someone who's natural can have their physique wax and wane over time, depending on how seriously they're taking their training. So yes, it is kind of true that if you build your physique naturally, you won't have the massive fluctuations that some of the steroid users see, but it also doesn't mean that you can just keep your physique forever. You have to keep the stimulus in place that built the physique to begin with. Now, that doesn't also mean that if you take any time off or if you deload, you're going to lose all your muscle right away. But I see a lot of natural guys fall into this very minimalistic approach where they say, okay, I'll just, as long as I progressively overload, as long as I eat 0.8 grams of protein per pound per day, I'll be good, and I don't need to worry about all the other details. Well, sometimes that type of an approach can really end up, it can cause your physique to take a step backwards. Right? So my experience is that's not true. Just like any lifter, if you're not applying yourself properly, you can take a step back.
This one was kind of a surprise to me, to be honest with you. I've been an HRT guy now for 3 years, and I eat less. I'm not as structured as I used to be because I haven't competed in 3 years. And one of the things I found was, as long as I continued to train really hard, I really kept my muscle. But if I got lazy, if I was just, you know what, I'm not going to train real hard, I could see like instant, and I've noticed this, and I've told a lot of my friends this, like, as long as I'm training really hard, I keep the muscle. But to your point, if I start backing off and not training real hard, I see it going away quick. And I didn't really, honestly, I didn't know how big of a deal it would be when I, stopped competing 3 years ago. But this is something like this weekend, I feel pretty good. I mean, I feel pretty big and strong, but I've been killing myself the last 2 or 3 weeks for this weekend. So even for somebody like me, an HRT guy, the effort, the difference in how I look, it's very, very noticeable.
For me, I think, when you're natural, you have two variables, training and nutrition, right? So it's pretty simple. Even with nutrition, when I take a more lackadaisical approach, so I'm eyeballing everything, whatever, it's bedtime, I haven't eaten in 5 or 6 hours, but I'll just have a bag of popcorn and go to bed. That, for me anyway, that doesn't cut it. My physique looks worse when I'm doing that than when I'm eating a solid 4 to 5 hits of protein per day. I'm timing my protein before bed, even timing it around the workout. I think these little things can make a difference. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But having kind of all your ducks in a row with training and nutrition will optimize your physique. And if you take a step back from that, your physique may take a hit for the worse. Now, this is speaking to like your audience, and I think people who are trying to get everything out of this, right? Like they want to be their best. You can absolutely be good by just focusing on the main things, progressive overload, eat enough protein, caloric balance, you're good. You don't need to worry about all those little details.
We have higher expectations.
But that's not for this channel, so we'll leave that.
All right, number 4, I think sometimes natural guys put on a little too much fat, and they don't have the enhancements one of the things that being enhanced does is it absolutely helps you maintain muscle when you diet. No doubt about it. Absolutely. Constantly cranked up protein synthesis, blah, blah, blah. But I think one of the things that natural guys do is they eat too much. They go way too in a caloric surplus. They're way too deep into a caloric surplus. And then what happens is when they get really fat, now all of a sudden they got to do so much cardio. They got to take their calories so low that they end up losing the muscle they gain. So there is a point, I feel, that when you start just gaining fat.
Yeah,
and
totally.
When you get to that point, it's like you're in no man's land. All you're doing is making it harder on you when you diet.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think a part of it also depends on how advanced you are. Well, I'm going to ask you this. Do you think that guys who are enhanced can get away with bigger surpluses and use those calories to build more muscle. Right.
For sure.
So you would say for a natural lifter, maybe be in more of a moderate surplus because there's a limit to how much you're going to use those calories to
only
build
going
muscle.
to be able to build so much muscle.
Yeah, totally.
You know, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as a beginner, if you're in your first year, maybe 2 of lifting, as a natural lifter, it almost mimics enhancements in a way because you're so primed to build muscle. So at that time, I feel like this is why I really discourage beginners from going in a caloric deficit. And I would say at that point in your training career, it's better to eat a bit more than not enough because you're so primed, almost like an enhanced athlete would be. After that first year or 2 though, exactly like you said, like any adaptation in the body, it starts to become resistant to more muscle growth. So you can throw more calories at the body, but it's just going to store it as fat. There's no limit to that.
I love your point about beginners, though. I love that point. A little more leeway there. I didn't even think about that. It makes total sense.
And then to flip it again, I do see, especially in like the Instagram age, people are trying to stay so lean all the time that they are scared to even enter a surplus at all, and they're limiting their growth potential. So that could be another mistake. So the 4th mistake would be putting on too much body fat, which absolutely people do. They're like, it's bulking season, let's go. And then as a natural, to your point, then when you want to diet down again, which everyone inevitably will, unless you just always want to be bulked, bear mode, permabulked, then I think the research that we have shows that you're probably going to lose a lot of that. So it's like what you might have gained from the heavier bulk might just come off when you diet down again, depending on how lean you get. So that would be the 4th mistake. The 5th mistake would be being too scared to put on any body fat. And if you want to build muscle as a natural, I don't think you should try to stay like sub 10% body fat year round. I don't think sure, you can do it. You can recomp. These things are possible, but you won't build the most muscle you can by always being in a deficit or always being at maintenance. I think roughly speaking, like a 20%-ish caloric surplus is a good way to go. So if you'd maintain on 2,500, that would be like 2,500 calories, let's say. That would be about 3,000. And you might have to jack that up a bit as your metabolism speeds up and as you gain weight.
I like that number, actually. I like that number. I like that number a lot. That tends to be where I usually have people 15, 20%. That's a great...
Keep you lean and you have enough calories to fuel performance.
I like your number too, like the 10%. Like I have the enhanced guys, I tell them there's no real reason to go above 10 or 11. But they're going to have the advantages coming down. But the natural guys, and I'm more like, hey, 14, 15%, it's okay.
For body fat.
It's okay. It's like, it's
I
not
agree.
the end of the world.
I agree.
But then when they start getting up towards 18, 20, it's like, whoa.
And I've experimented with this myself, like getting into the higher body fat ranges. There's, there's a crowd of people who just want to look big. Like they want to look like they've got a lot of size. And as a natural, for most guys, now there's some freaks out there, but your average guy, if you want to look bigger in clothes, walking around in the gym with a pump, you got to have body fat on. Otherwise, you're going to look smaller. So it kind of depends on what your goal is. But assuming we got the typical person who generally wants to be pretty lean and also look pretty muscular, I think a more moderate bulking approach is the way to go.
All right. That was number 5. All right. Number 6, training principles and exercises. So it never ceases to amaze me. I can put up a video where I do an easy bar curl, a seated dumbbell curl, and then a preacher curl. And I'll get people saying, that doesn't work for naturals. Like, what do you mean? A curl doesn't work for naturals? Well, what other thing does the bicep do? Do you have this special exercise? So it just never ceases to amaze me. Like, training principles are training principles. An exercise that works for you is going to work for you whether you're natural or there's no special exercises that you can do once you start taking gear. Like it doesn't expand your exercise.
Yeah, that's right.
You still have exercises that pretty much kind of fit your body that work well for you. So that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making. It's like, they have these assumptions. And then like if you throw in like the principles, like let's say doing a little bit of high intensity work, maybe some partials or some forced reps, those obviously can create some overload in itself. And I've seen natural folks say, well, you can't do any of that stuff when you're natural. Look, you got to be a little more careful for sure, because it requires more recovery. But to just say naturals, they can't use certain exercises, they can never do a drop set, they can never do partials. I just think that's it kind of goes back to your first point that you made about expectations. It's like, no, naturals can do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I use those techniques in my training, like you saw.
Yeah, it was great today. It was great today. We used some partials on a pullover, which felt awesome. Yeah.
I think a lot of people, I get this too a lot online, is there's this strict, clearly defined line, and you've got enhanced methods, natural methods. Whereas in reality, it's like you've got human physiology, and it's pretty much the same. And then there are some things that enhanced guys can get away with that natural guys might not be able to do because recovery is less. And then there are some things that might be slightly more advantageous for a natural lifter. But like for the most part, it's the same muscle. You know what I mean? It is what it is. And I think it's silly too that people are like, oh, this exercise won't work, or oh, I shouldn't do this isolation exercise or this intensity technique. It's like, no, it can be effective for all people who want to build muscle.
There's no special curl for naturals.
Yeah, I think...
Or enhanced.
Yeah, totally. And I wonder about this too. It's like there are individual differences. So it's like... This is going back to the line thing, right? There might be an enhanced guy over here, but his natural genetics are worse than a natural guy who has amazing genetics.
Exactly.
So it's like it's not like, oh, you took some testosterone, so you've got this amazing recovery ability. You can just blast yourself for 8 hours and recover from it fine. No, a natural guy like with great genetics could probably do way more than an enhanced guy with subpar genetics. 100%. So it's like figure out what works for you and put aside for the most part if the natural or enhanced considerations. Just like you wouldn't compare yourself to Ronnie Coleman if he were natural, because he's a freak of nature. Even regardless. You shouldn't compare yourself to be like, oh, just because this guy is natural, then I can just replicate what he does and get his results. The playing field isn't even. Anyway, you slice it. Well, because of the genetics card, right?
It's I'm glad you brought that up. I did a video a couple years ago where I said, forget being natural or enhanced. Think about recovery. Just how can you recover? Like that's the point of it. Like recover and train.
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyways,
on the point of recovery, I think and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. The main difference I would think between enhanced and natural is that enhanced guys can probably tolerate more volume because their work capacity is higher.
For sure, that and there's some cortisol aspects too. But I mean, you got 24/7 ramped up protein synthesis. You're kind of blocking the actions of cortisol to a degree, and that's actually one of the reasons why when guys are on gear and they come off, and all of a sudden because now they got this cortisol rebound. But yeah, I mean. At the end of the day, though, it's still someone's recovery. And like people ask me, how often should I train a body part? And I always say, when it's recovered. That could be 3 days. That could be 6 days.
Yeah, I like that answer.
It's when it's recovered.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing about designing training programs is people sometimes will have to adjust a little bit based on when they recover. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're going to have to change the training so that you recover in time to fit your split.
Exactly, yeah. And I think you could be recovered in 1 day if you're really smart about it, if you structure it up the right way.
I mean, take a look at what you're doing. Like some people would say, well, you need 48 hours. And you're proving that you don't necessarily need 48 hours.
I could do 3 sets of lateral raises and be good to go in 2 hours.
12, yeah. And then you look at...
So it just depends.
Then you look at what... guys will say, well, it doesn't, you have to train, you have to hit something 3 times a week. Actually, there's a lot of people, natural and enhanced, that have gotten very big hitting stuff too. So these rules are kind of crazy. It's just when the muscle's recovered, hit it.
Gotcha.
Without tearing your joints up.
Yeah.
That was number 6.
Number 7, a lot of natural guys, I kind of already alluded to this, but the idea is that as a natural, the details don't really matter. Like I find a lot of enhanced guys get obsessed with maximizing everything because they're getting good results and they're like, well, I want to do everything that I can to get the biggest and best that I can be,
Put all
right?
the stuff to use.
Let's make it happen, right? Whereas natural guys, I find, take this more defeatist mentality, like I said, and then they kind of say, well, if you look at this study, nutrient timing, that's kind of debunked, so I won't worry about that. I'll just hit my macros. Protein before bed, it might have a small effect, but whatever. I'm tired. I'll forget my protein before bed. What else? Like spacing your meals out decently well. Like it might make some difference, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Training intensity. Well, I'll just leave 4 or 5 reps in reserve. It seems to work based on the research, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, well, sure, it's true that if you were to study one of these things in isolation, you might not detect a big difference at all. Mm-hmm. But when you start to stack these things together, that's when you can start to notice the differences on a physique level. And I've noticed that myself. I've noticed it with clients. When you get all these details in check, that's when you'll look your best. Now, that isn't to say like you need to obsess over every single little thing, but I think there are certain things that people neglect that they could pay attention to and get better results.
Yeah, I think the big picture thing, I look at that as people can get to 80 to 90% of their potential, but then how do you get them to that full potential? And that's how you do it.
And that's the interesting part.
That's the part that I love, man. That's where the nutrient timing comes in. That's where fine tuning, all this stuff comes in. And that's the challenge. That's the part I love, especially working with really high level people because they're already so close to their natural potential. It's like, man, how am I going to get another 10% out?
Those things, man. Those things can make a difference. Absolutely. All
So
right.
there's 7 reasons. Thank you, Jeff. And as we always say on this channel, we love everybody. We don't care what you do. We don't care if you take stuff, you don't take stuff. We love you anyway. We're just pumping out good content. So thank you, sir.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.